And now for something completely different. In his most famous book, the Jewish theologian Martin Buber articulated a theology that stems from human connection. Buber made a distinction between human interaction that was about using another person and interaction that truly recognized the humanity of that individual. He called the one that uses people as a vehicle for their desires the I-it relationship, and the one that truly sees the holiness in the other person, the I-thou relationship. Not only does this type of connection respect each person as an equal individual, but according to Buber, these relationships are the main way that people experience God in their lives. God dwells within the holy bonds between people, those who see the image of God in another rather than just an object. But a relationship can have pieces of the I-it relationship that not all are negative. There are times when we need others, whether it be a partner, a friend, or even a rabbi, to fulfill some personal or communal need, and that is fine. But if we want to experience the divine in a more spiritual relationship, we are always striving for the I-thou encounter. Needless to say, it is hard to experience such a connection between people when trying to do so through the intermediary of our devices and the internet. Rabbi Hodson taught me early on in my job here that it is always better to respond to a delicate situation over the phone or in person rather than trying to answer back over email. The problem with the digital space is that it creates enough distance between two people that not only do they usually not deal with the other as a thou, but barely sometimes even an it. This week especially, I encountered some of the worst examples of how social media enables people to be their worst selves. If you were to, God forbid, peek at the comments on any article about the upcoming Kanye West performance at the Alamo Dome, which I highly encourage against, you can see how awful people can be when the distance created by the internet enables the worst impulses in people to be shared. Such awful things are easier to say on Facebook. Things that you would think twice about saying to a human being in real life. And I have to admit that I too have succumbed to the ready impulse to attack people that I disagree with on the internet, to strike out at individuals I don't even know. These people become the lowest form of object to me, just a vehicle to allow me to win points in a debate that hardly ever goes anywhere or changes anyone's mind, even if it sometimes temporarily makes me feel better or more in the right. Being in a state of anger, even if righteous, is not a state that can allow an I-thou relationship to bloom. Often anger cuts off any possibility of an I-thou connection. When you're angry, you want to win, to put down the other person's opinion, and even to demean them as a person for daring to believe differently. That is certainly an I-it relationship, a different form of objectifying a human being. But it's not us alone who fail at this very challenge, but even the greatest of our prophets, Moses, succumbs to this impulse in our double Torah portion this week, Chukat-Balak. After a series of rebellions and complaints by Bnei Israel in the past 3 Parshiot, yet again, the people cry out for water and complain about their circumstances in the wilderness. In exasperation, Moses and Aaron fall on their faces before the tabernacle, and God's glory appears to them. God instructs them to take the staff and approach the rock, but rather than strike it as God once instructed in a similar story in Exodus, God commands Moses to speak to the rock, which will bring forth water. Now, I don't think I'm spoiling the story for anyone to tell you that this is not what Moses and Aaron do. Rather, Moses makes what sounds like an angry, sarcastic speech to the people, then strikes the rock twice, which, despite his disobedience of God's command, still pours forth water. As a consequence of this defiance, though, neither Aaron nor Moses will be allowed to enter the promised land, as they failed to sanctify God in the midst of the people. In previous episodes of rebellion, Moses goes back and forth between expressing utter frustration with the people and sometimes fighting for them to gain God's forgiveness. But in either case, he usually does so before God alone, not in the presence of all the people. His manner before the people in the past, by contrast, has mostly been level-headed, calm, not adding fuel to the fire. But in this episode, Moses doesn't go straight to do God's commandment in front of the people. He first feels compelled to speak harshly and sarcastically to them. He shouts, "Listen up, rebels! From this rock shall we bring forth water for you?" They are no longer Bnei Yisrael, the people of God's covenant. They are reduced entirely to rebels. They're no longer a group of thous, of individual human beings made in the image of God. Moses now treats them all together as an an indistinguishable mass of rebels. This is shockingly not too different from how their Egyptian oppressors thought of the Israelites. Moses has had his difficulties with the people, to say the least, but he has never been this harsh with the entire congregation. In this moment, Moses expresses publicly his feeling that his whole job seems to just be to bail out the people when they complain. In doing so, he loses sight of how he once blessed the people when they built the Mishkan and after the Mishkan was consecrated. But God chose Moses as a leader to be their advocate before God when things go sour. Through these actions, he proves to God that he has lost sight of the potential of the people to act as a thou. He no longer can defend the people while maintaining this cynical, furious feeling towards them. In cursing the people rather than lifting them up through God's kindness in providing for their needs, he did not sanctify God in the midst of the congregation. But how does the command to speak to the rock sanctify God? Now, one possibility is that the command for Moses to speak to the rock would demonstrate that God can create an I-thou relationship even between a human being and an object. This was supposed to be a symbol of the ideal connection between people. Instead of treating this rock like an entity with dignity with whom you connect through words, Moses takes people who should be treated with dignity and strikes out verbally at them before extending that violence toward the rock. Neither his words nor his actions were those that sanctified the divine in the presence of his people. Too often in our lives, when we use these digital platforms for connection, we too take a real person who should be treated with dignity and respect, and we treat them as inanimate objects, just a rock to strike at in our anger. We don't think of the consequences of these actions, not only for the other person, but for ourselves. We take a situation where we could sanctify God's name through our actions, and instead choose the path that will be a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. We lose a chance to bring God into the connection between two human beings, and instead treat such interaction as an opportunity to let out our worst impulses. All of us then face the choice of Moses with regularity. We need to be aware of what social media is good for, being a starting point for real connections between people we love, creating awareness of real-world issues, but we also need to be aware what it is not good for. Having good faith arguments, convincing people to think or act differently, replacing real-life connections. Now, we may know this intellectually, but it can be particularly challenging when we are pulled into the vortex that social media creates. This Parsha is our reminder that real human connection, real communication, only happens in the presence of someone whose humanity you see and acknowledge. It's our reminder to speak deeply with people, even if we feel they are as immovable as a rock, and remember that they too deserve our respect. If we do this, perhaps we can experience a real I-thou relationship, one that sanctifies God and becomes an example for all those who encounter us. Now, we may fail at times, but if we bring a little more awareness into our interactions with people, we may find in that space between us that God can be found. Shabbat Shalom.